At the hospital, my daughter said, "We don't need you." I stayed silent until the doctor walked in and asked for me. Only me. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from in the comments. Never thought I'd be sitting in a hospital waiting room, feeling like an unwelcome stranger in my own family's crisis. My hands trembled as I flipped through a dog-eared magazine from 2 years ago, not reading a single word, just waiting, always waiting. "Dad, why are you even here? We don't need you." Those words from Deborah's mouth cut deeper than any surgeon's scalpel. My own daughter, 48 years old, standing there with her arms crossed, designer purse dangling from her wrist, looking at me like I was something unpleasant stuck to her shoe. I'm Richard Caldwell, 73 years old, and this is what happens when you outlive your usefulness to your children. At least that's what I thought until the doctor walked in and changed everything. "Mr. Caldwell, Richard Caldwell." The young doctor scanned the waiting room, clipboard in hand. Deborah stepped forward. "I'm his daughter. You can speak to me." The doctor looked past her directly at me. "Mr. Caldwell, I need to speak with you. Alone, please." I'll never forget the look on Deborah's face. Shock, confusion, and something else I couldn't quite place. The fear, maybe. Whatever game she was playing had just hit an unexpected snag. How did we get here? That's what keeps me up at night. When did my little girl, the one who used to ride on my shoulders at the county fair, turn into this cold stranger? Retired from coal construction 11 years ago. 42 years I gave that company, working my way up from carrying lumber to managing entire projects. I built things that would last generations: schools, hospitals, community centers. Honest work that left my back aching, but my conscience clear. Margaret, my wife of 49 years, passed 3 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, quick and cruel. We'd been planning a cruise to Alaska, something we'd put off for decades while raising kids and paying bills. The cruise tickets sat in my dresser drawer for months after the funeral. I couldn't bring myself to throw them away. After Margaret died, Deborah started coming around more. At first I thought it was concern for her old man living alone. She'd bring groceries, help with paperwork, call to check in. I was grateful. My son Michael lives in Seattle with his family, visits maybe twice a year, so having Deborah close by in the same town seemed like a blessing. "Dad, you shouldn't be living in this big house all by yourself," she said one Sunday afternoon about 6 months after Margaret's funeral. "All these stairs, all this maintenance, it's not safe." Maybe she was right. The 2-story colonial we'd bought in 1983 did feel empty now. Too many rooms filled with too many memories. "I've been thinking," Deborah continued, pouring me another cup of coffee. "What if you sold this place and moved into the guest house on our property? It's just sitting there empty, and you'd be close enough that we could check on you." It made sense at the time, practical. The guest house behind Deborah and her husband Harry's McMansion was small but modern. 1 floor, no stairs, easy to clean, and I'd be near family. I sold the house where we'd raised our children for $375,000. After paying off the remaining mortgage and some medical bills from Margaret's treatment, I was left with about $290,000. Not a fortune, but enough to see me through my golden years if I was careful. "Dad, Harry and I can manage your finances," Deborah offered. "You know how confusing all that investment stuff can be. Harry works with numbers all day at the bank." I hesitated. I'd always handled our finances. Margaret and I weren't rich, but we'd saved diligently. We had our house, my pension, some investments, and our emergency fund. "I can manage, sweetheart." "Your old man's not senile yet," I joked. Something flashed across Deborah's face, impatience, maybe disappointment. "Of course not, Dad, but why stress yourself? We just want to help." I gave in. That was my first mistake. There would be many more. The guest house was comfortable enough. I moved in with a fraction of my belongings, donating the rest or putting them in storage. Deborah insisted I needed a fresh start, without all that clutter. I noticed the changes gradually. First, I couldn't access my online banking anymore. Oh, Harry updated the security settings, Deborah explained. He'll handle the bills from now on. Then my mail started going to their house. It's easier this way, Dad. Sometimes you forget to check your mailbox. I didn't forget to check my mailbox. Not once. 6 months into living in the guest house, I asked Harry about withdrawing some money for a fishing trip with my old work buddies. Now's not a great time to pull from investments, he said, not looking up from his phone. Market's down. How about I just give you some cash? He handed me $200 like I was a teenager asking for allowance. Actually, I was thinking about taking $2,000, I said. Frank's son has a cabin in Montana. We'd be gone for 2 weeks. Harry and Deborah exchanged a look I couldn't read. 2 weeks is a long time, Dad, Deborah said. What about your heart medication? What if something happens out there in the wilderness? I've been taking my pills just fine for years, I countered. And Frank's son is a paramedic. The argument escalated, ending with Deborah in tears and me feeling like the villain. I didn't go on that fishing trip, or the next one, or the class reunion in Chicago. Over the next 2 years, my world shrank to the guest house, Deborah and Harry's kitchen for Sunday dinners, and occasional supervised outings to doctor's appointments or the grocery store. My friends stopped calling after being told too many times that I was resting or not feeling well. I began to wonder about my money. Whenever I asked, Harry would show me impressive-looking statements with numbers that never seemed to go down. But I never saw the actual accounts anymore. Everything's great, Richard, Harry would say, clapping me on the shoulder. Your nest egg is growing, no need to worry. The isolation was the hardest part. I'd always been social. Foreman at work, bowling league on Tuesdays, poker with the neighbors on Fridays. Now my only regular visitors were Deborah, Harry, and occasionally their kids when they wanted something. The breaking point came when I discovered they'd sold my truck. The 2010 Ford F-150 I'd bought new and maintained meticulously. I'd gone to the detached garage behind the guest house looking for an old photo album I'd stored there, only to find an empty space where my truck should be. You never drive it anymore? Dad, Deborah said when I confronted her. It was just sitting there depreciating. We got a good price for it. It was my truck, I said, my voice rising. Paid for. Mine. Actually, Harry interjected, since we're managing your finances, the truck was technically under our care. We made a sound financial decision. That night I lay awake thinking about Margaret. She would have seen through their scheme immediately. Margaret had always been the sharper one, the one who could spot a con from a mile away. Trust but verify, she used to say. The next morning I walked 2 miles to the public library. The librarian, a kind woman named Patricia, who remembered me from community meetings, helped me set up an email account. Then I emailed Michael in Seattle. Son, I need your help. Something's not right with your sister and Harry. Can you come visit soon? Don't tell Deborah I contacted you. Michael's response came that evening. Dad, Deborah told me you've been confused lately. She said the doctors mentioned early signs of dementia. I'll try to visit next month, but please listen to Deborah and Harry for now. They only want what's best. For you. They'd gotten to my son, too. I was alone. At the library again the next day, I did something I'd never done before. I Googled elder financial abuse. What I read made my stomach turn. The patterns were textbook: isolation from friends and family, taking control of finances, limiting independence, gaslighting about mental capacity. I needed help. But who would believe me over my successful, charming daughter and her banker husband? I needed proof. Patricia the librarian noticed my distress and asked if everything was okay. I took a chance and told her everything. My friend's husband is a lawyer specializing in elder law, she said quietly. Let me give you his number. No obligation, just a conversation. The lawyer, James Morrison, agreed to meet me at a coffee shop near the library. He listened without interrupting as I laid out the past 3 years. Unfortunately, Mr. Caldwell, your story isn't unique, he said when I finished. The good news is, if your money was taken fraudulently, we can fight it. The bad news is, we need evidence. How do I get that when I don't have access to anything? I asked. We start with bank subpoenas, but first, we need to establish that you're mentally competent. They'll fight dirty once they realize you're onto them. He recommended a geriatric specialist who could evaluate me and document my mental capacity. The appointment was set for the following week. I never made it there. The night before the appointment, I felt strange after dinner at Deborah and Harry's. Dizzy, confused, I barely made it back to the guest house before collapsing on the sofa. I woke up in the hospital, an IV in my arm, and a concerned nurse checking my vital signs. "Mr. Caldwell, you had a hypoglycemic episode," she explained. "Your blood sugar dropped dangerously low. Do you have diabetes?" I didn't. Never had. Deborah appeared in the doorway, concern etched on her face. Oscar-worthy performance. "Dad, thank goodness you're awake. We were so worried." Harry stood behind her, nodding solemnly. The nurse left, and Deborah's expression changed instantly. "What were you thinking talking to a lawyer?" she hissed. "Harry saw you at Cornerstone Cafe yesterday with James Morrison. So that's what this was about. They'd found out I was fighting back. I want my money back, Deborah," I said plainly. "All of it. Then I'm moving out." Harry stepped forward. "Richard, you're not well. This episode proves it. Low blood sugar can cause confusion, paranoia. The doctor is recommending we consider a care facility." "I'm not diabetic," I said. "I've never had blood sugar issues in my life." "The stress you're under can trigger all sorts of health problems," Deborah said smoothly. "That's why we need to take better care of you." That's when I knew they'd done something to my food or drink. They'd deliberately caused this episode to discredit me, to prove I couldn't take care of myself. A nurse appeared to take Harry and Deborah to fill out paperwork. As soon as they left, I pulled out the IV, a technique I'd unfortunately learned during Margaret's hospital stays, and found my clothes in the small closet. I was halfway dressed when a doctor walked in. "Mr. Caldwell, what are you doing? You need to rest." "I need to leave," I said, fumbling with my shirt buttons. "It's not safe for me here." The doctor frowned. "Not safe? Sir, you're in a hospital." "My daughter and her husband, I think they drugged me to make me look incompetent." I could see the doubt in his eyes. Another old man with paranoid delusions. "Mr. Caldwell, your daughter seems very concerned about you. She mentioned you've been having some cognitive issues lately." "She's lying," I said desperately. "They're trying to steal my money. They've already taken my house, my truck, my independence." The doctor sighed. I'd heard that sigh before. The one that says, "Humor the confused old man." "Why don't you rest for now? We'll run some more tests, and you can talk to our social worker tomorrow." By tomorrow, Deborah and Harry would have convinced everyone I was senile. By tomorrow, I might be sedated and on my way to a care facility that would drain what remained of my finances while keeping me docile and out of the way. That's when I saw it, my chance. The doctor had left his phone on the bedside table while helping me back into bed. When he turned to adjust the IV stand, I slipped it into my pocket. As soon as he left, I used the phone to call the only person I could think of who might help. "Me, Patricia from the library." "Patricia, it's Richard Caldwell. I'm at Mercy General Hospital. I need help." Bless that woman. She didn't ask questions. "I'll call James Morrison. Stay put." I couldn't stay put. Deborah and Harry would be back any minute. I finished dressing and peered out into the hallway. The nurse's station was busy with shift change. Perfect timing. I made it to the elevator without being noticed, rode it down to the main floor, and walked as confidently as I could toward the exit. Freedom was 20 feet away when I heard Deborah's voice behind me. "Dad, what are you doing?" I turned to see her hurrying toward me, Harry close behind. "Dad, why are you dressed? You need to be in bed." "I'm leaving," I said firmly. "You can't leave. You're not well." People were starting to look. A security guard took notice. "Sir, is everything all right?" he asked, approaching our group. "No," said Deborah before I could speak. My father is confused. He has dementia and had a medical episode. He needs to go back to his room. The security guard looked at me sympathetically. Sir, let's get you back upstairs where you can get the care you need. I don't have dementia, I said, loud enough for everyone in the lobby to hear. My daughter and her husband are trying to steal my money. They've already taken control of my accounts. Now they're trying to have me declared incompetent. Deborah's face flushed red. Dad, you're embarrassing yourself. This is exactly what the doctor was concerned about, these paranoid delusions. Mr. Caldwell? Richard Caldwell? A new voice cut through the tension. We all turned to see a young doctor with a clipboard scanning the lobby. He was not the doctor who had been treating me upstairs. Deborah stepped forward. I'm his daughter. You can speak to me. The doctor looked past her, directly at me. Mr. Caldwell, I need to speak with you, alone, please. I'll never forget the look on Deborah's face. Shock, confusion, and fear. Whatever game she was playing had just hit an unexpected snag. I'm Dr. Chen, he said as he led me to a quiet corner. James Morrison called me. I'm a friend of his from law school, and I happen to be on staff here. He said you might be in trouble. For the first time in years, I felt hope. They're trying to make me look crazy, I whispered. I think they put something in my food to cause the hypoglycemia. Dr. Chen nodded. I've ordered blood tests to check for unusual substances, and I've called in a geriatric specialist to evaluate you, officially, for the hospital records. He glanced over at Deborah and Harry, who were watching us intently. Mr. Caldwell, do you want to press charges if we find evidence of drugging? Did I want to send my own daughter to jail? The girl who once made me handprint cards for Father's Day? Who cried when I taught her to ride a bike? Who danced with me at her wedding? But that girl was gone. In her place was a stranger who saw me as nothing but a bank account, an inconvenience, a problem to solve. Yes, I said finally. I want to press charges. The next 48 hours were a blur of blood tests, cognitive evaluations, and hushed conversations in hospital corridors. Dr. Chen had become my unexpected guardian angel, keeping Deborah and Harry at arm's length while the investigation unfolded. Your tox screen came back positive for a sedative called Ativan, Dr. Chen told me on the second morning, his voice low, even though we were alone in my room. It's not something you've been prescribed. Combined with your evening glass of wine, it could easily cause the symptoms you experienced. My hands trembled as I processed what he was saying. My own daughter drugged me. He nodded grimly. The police will want to speak with you. They're treating this as assault. I stared out the window at the oak tree that had probably been standing there since before the hospital was built. Strong, rooted, unchanging. Everything my family wasn't. What happens now? I asked. The hospital has filed a protective order. Your daughter and son-in-law can't visit you without supervision. And James Morrison is on his way with a court order to freeze your accounts pending investigation. A soft knock at the door interrupted us. A woman in a neat pantsuit entered, badge in hand. Mr. Caldwell. I'm Detective Susan Reynolds. I need to ask you some questions about your relationship with your daughter and son-in-law. I told her everything. The slow isolation after Margaret died, the sale of my house, the gradual loss of control over my own life, the discovered meeting with the lawyer, and my sudden medical emergency. You realize these are serious allegations, Detective Reynolds said when I finished. If we move forward, your daughter could face criminal charges. I understand, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. But this isn't just about me. How many other elderly parents are out there being manipulated by the children they trusted? Someone has to stand up. She nodded, a hint of respect in her eyes. We'll need access to your financial records. That's the problem, I explained. I don't have access anymore. Deborah and Harry control everything. Not for long, said a voice. And from the doorway, James Morrison walked in, briefcase in hand. Judge Barnes signed the emergency order. Their accounts are frozen, and the bank has been instructed to provide all records related to your assets. For the first time in years, I felt something like power returning to my hands. That afternoon, my son Michael flew in from Seattle. He looked shell-shocked as he entered my hospital room. "Dad," he said, his voice breaking, "I had no idea. Deborah told me you were confused, that you needed help managing things. I believed her. I wanted to be angry with him for accepting Deborah's version so easily, but the anguish on his face stopped me. He'd been manipulated too, just from a distance." "She's your sister," I said. "You trusted her. So did I." Michael ran his hand through his hair, a gesture so like his mother's that it made my chest ache. "The police searched their house this morning. They found your financial documents in Harry's home office, and prescription pills that match what was in your system. The evidence was mounting, but it brought me no joy. Only a bone-deep sadness that my daughter had fallen so far. By evening, James Morrison returned with the preliminary financial report. His face was grim as he spread documents across my hospital tray table. "It's worse than we thought, Richard. They've been systematically draining your accounts for nearly 3 years. The numbers told a devastating story. My $290,000 from the house sale, my $2,100 monthly pension, my $1,400 monthly Social Security, all funneled through accounts I couldn't access." "Where did it go?" I asked, staring at the statements. "Some went to their mortgage, a vacation property in Colorado. Some to their kids' college funds, but most went to cover Harry's gambling debts." Gambling. The word felt foreign on my tongue. Harry, with his pressed shirts and position at the bank, didn't seem the type. "Online poker, mostly," James explained. "He's lost nearly $180,000 over the past 2 years. That's probably why they accelerated their timeline with you. They were getting desperate. My money, the money Margaret and I had saved over decades of careful planning, gone to cover Harry's addiction, and Deborah had helped him do it." "How much is left?" I finally asked. James hesitated. "About $42,000. They were in the process of transferring another large sum when the accounts were frozen. $42,000, not even enough to buy a modest home in today's market. Not enough to support myself independently for more than a couple of years. What about the guest house? Do I at least have a place to live?" James shook his head. "It's on their property. Legally, you're just a guest there." The reality of my situation hit me like a physical blow. I was 73 years old, in poor health, with no home, and barely enough money to rent an apartment for a year or two. My own children had stripped me of everything I'd worked for. "There is some good news," James added, seeing my despair. "With the criminal charges pending, we can petition for restitution. And given Harry's position at the bank, there may be professional ethics violations we can leverage." Detective Reynolds returned the next morning with another officer. Her expression told me everything before she spoke. "We've issued arrest warrants for Deborah and Harry Coleman on charges of elder abuse, financial exploitation, and assault," she said. "They were taken into custody an hour ago." I closed my eyes, trying to picture my daughter in handcuffs. The image wouldn't form. Instead, I saw 5-year-old Deborah in her yellow sundress, picking dandelions in our backyard. I saw 16-year-old Deborah nervous before her first date, asking me if she looked pretty. I saw 30-year-old Deborah radiant in her wedding dress, whispering, "I love you, Daddy," as I walked her down the aisle. "Mr. Caldwell," Detective Reynolds was watching me with concern. "Are you all right?" "No," I answered honestly. "I don't think I'll ever be all right again." She nodded with understanding. "There's something else you should know. When we searched their house, we found evidence this wasn't the first time they've done this. There were documents belonging to Harry's aunt, who died in a nursing home last year. We're reopening that investigation, so it wasn't just me. There was a pattern. Somehow that made it both better and worse. Dr. Chen discharged me the following day, but I had nowhere to go. Michael offered his guest room in Seattle, but the thought of being dependent on another child, even one who hadn't betrayed me, was unbearable. I've made some calls, Patricia the librarian said when she visited me that afternoon. There's a senior apartment complex downtown with a vacancy. It's not fancy, but it's clean and safe, and it's within walking distance of the library. I could have hugged her. How much is the rent? $800 a month, utilities included, within your budget, at least for now. Thank you, I said, meaning it more than she could know, for everything. If you hadn't answered my call that night, she waved away my gratitude. My father went through something similar with my brother. Nobody believed him either. I swore I'd never ignore those signs again. The senior apartment was exactly as Patricia had described, not fancy, but clean and functional. 1 bedroom, a small living area, a kitchenette. The kind of place Margaret would have called cozy in her gentle way of finding the positive. Moved in with the few possessions I'd managed to retrieve from the guest house. Some clothes, my favorite chair, Margaret's photo albums. Everything else had been sold or was tied up in the legal proceedings. The first night alone in that apartment was one of the hardest of my life. No Margaret, no family, just me and the ticking of a wall clock Patricia had given me as a housewarming gift. I called Michael before going to bed. "How are you holding up, Dad?" he asked, the concern in his voice genuine. "I'm managing," I lied. "How are things on your end?" He sighed heavily. "Deborah's kids are staying with us for now. They're devastated, confused. They don't understand why their parents are in jail. My grandchildren, I hadn't even thought about how this would affect them, more innocent victims in Deborah and Harry's scheme. Tell them," I started, then stopped. What could I possibly say? That I was sorry for sending their parents to jail? That I wished none of this had happened? Empty words for children whose world had just imploded. "I'll figure something out," Michael said, understanding my silence. "Get some rest, Dad. I'll call you tomorrow." Sleep didn't come easily that night. Every creak in the unfamiliar apartment startled me awake. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Deborah's face, not as the cold woman who had drugged me, but as my little girl who had once loved me without reservation. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for the following week. James Morrison prepared me as best he could, but nothing could ready me for the moment I walked into that courtroom and saw Deborah and Harry seated at the defendant's table. Deborah looked smaller somehow, her designer clothes replaced by a plain blue suit, her carefully highlighted hair pulled back severely. She didn't turn when I entered, though I felt certain she knew I was there. Harry, on the other hand, stared directly at me, his expression a mix of defiance and calculation. Even now he was assessing angles, looking for leverage. The proceedings were clinical and precise. Charges read, pleas entered, not guilty on all counts, despite the mountain of evidence. Bail set at amounts that ensured they would remain in custody. Throughout it all, Deborah never looked at me once. Not when the prosecutor detailed how they had systematically isolated me. Not when the evidence of drugging was presented. Not when the financial exploitation was laid bare for all to hear. Only when the judge called a recess did she finally turn. Our eyes met across the courtroom, and what I saw there chilled me to the bone. Not remorse, not shame, not even anger, just nothing. As if I were a stranger she had passed on the street, unworthy of emotion. In that moment, I realized a terrible truth. My daughter was gone. Perhaps she had been gone for years, replaced by someone I didn't know and couldn't reach. Outside the courthouse, reporters clustered with microphones and cameras. Elder abuse cases rarely made the news, but the combination of a banker husband, prescription drugging, and gambling debts had created a perfect media storm. "Mr. Caldwell, how does it feel to see your daughter facing criminal charges?" "Mr. Caldwell. Were there warning signs you missed, Mr. Caldwell?" What would you say to other elderly parents worried about their children's intentions? James Morrison shielded me as best he could, hurrying me toward a waiting car. But one question cut through the chaos and stopped me in my tracks. "Mr. Caldwell, do you still love your daughter?" I turned toward the young reporter who had asked, her expression earnest behind her microphone. "Yes," I said simply. "That's what makes this so painful." In the days that followed, my story became something of a cautionary tale. Local news ran special segments on elder abuse. The district attorney's office announced a new task force focused on financial crimes against seniors. My face appeared in newspapers beside headlines like "Betrayed by Blood, A Father's Fight for Justice," and "Elder Abuse, the Silent Epidemic." I hated every minute of it. This wasn't justice. It was a spectacle, and somewhere in all the legal proceedings and media coverage, the simple tragedy of a family destroyed was lost. 2 weeks after the hearing, I received my first visitor at the new apartment, Harry's sister, Louise. We had met a few times at family gatherings over the years, but had never been close. "I came to apologize," she said, perched uncomfortably on the edge of my second-hand sofa. "I suspected something was wrong. The way they talked about you, the way they limited access to you, I should have said something." "Why didn't you?" I asked, not accusingly, just curious. She twisted her wedding ring nervously. "Family loyalty, I suppose, and denial. It's easier to believe an old man is confused than to accept that your brother is a criminal." I couldn't argue with that. Hadn't I spent years making excuses for Deborah's behavior, telling myself she was just concerned for my welfare? Ignoring the red flags because the alternative was too painful. "They did it to others," Louise continued, her voice dropping. "Harry's Aunt Mildred, our cousin Robert. Probably more we don't know about yet. It was a pattern." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, suddenly exhausted by the weight of it all. "Because you need to know it wasn't personal. It wasn't about you, Richard. It was about money, always money." She hesitated, then added, "And because Harry is trying to cut a deal, he's offering to testify against Deborah." The betrayal continued, even behind bars. Harry throwing my daughter under the bus to save himself. "What will you do?" Louise asked when I didn't respond. "What could I do?" The damage was done, my savings nearly wiped out, my relationship with my daughter destroyed, my trust in family shattered. "I'll survive," I said finally. "I always have." After Louise left, I sat alone in my small apartment, surrounded by the few remnants of my former life. On the wall hung a family photo from Christmas 10 years ago. Margaret still healthy and radiant, Michael and his wife smiling with their young children, Deborah and Harry looking prosperous and content, me in the center, proud patriarch of what I thought was a loving family. I should have taken it down, but I couldn't bring myself to erase that moment, even knowing it was built on illusions. That night, I dreamed of Margaret. We were walking along the beach we used to visit in the summer, her hand warm in mine. "You have to let her go," Dream Margaret said, looking out at the waves. "She's our daughter," I protested. Margaret turned to me, her eyes sad but resolute. "Yes, and we raised her to make her own choices. This is the choice she made." I woke with tears on my face and Margaret's words echoing in my mind. Let her go. But how do you let go of someone who has been part of your heart for nearly 5 decades? The answer came in an unexpected form the next day, a letter delivered by James Morrison, written on the pale blue stationery of the county jail. "It's from Deborah," he said, handing me the sealed envelope. "You don't have to read it." But of course I did. How could I not? Inside was a single page covered in Deborah's neat handwriting. No "Dear Dad," no signature at the end. Just words that would change everything. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But you deserve the truth. It started small. Borrowing from your accounts to cover Harry's losses. We always intended to pay it back. Then it got easier, taking more, making excuses, telling ourselves you wouldn't miss it. that you had more than you needed while we were struggling. When you started asking questions, we panicked. The drugging was Harry's idea. I went along with it. I've gone along with everything for so long that I don't know who I am anymore. Harry is offering to testify against me. He says it was all my idea, that I manipulated him because of my unhealthy attachment issues with you. His lawyer thinks a jury will believe that a daughter betraying her father is worse than a son-in-law betraying his father-in-law. Maybe they're right. I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that in the darkness of this cell, I finally see myself clearly. And I am ashamed. Deborah's letter sat on my kitchen table for 3 days. I'd read it so many times the creases were starting to tear. Those words, clinical, emotionless, yet somehow raw, were the closest thing to honesty my daughter had offered me in years. I'm ashamed. Not I'm sorry, not I love you, just acknowledgement of shame, as if naming the emotion might somehow contain it. On the 4th day, Michael flew in from Seattle. He looked exhausted, the weight of managing his own family while dealing with our fractured one etched into the lines around his eyes. "How are you holding up, Dad?" he asked, settling into my second-hand armchair. "I'm surviving," I said, pouring us both coffee in mismatched mugs from the thrift store. "How are Deborah's kids?" Michael sighed. "Struggling. Jason's acting out at school. Emma barely speaks. Their world's been turned upside down. My grandchildren, 15 and 17, old enough to understand what their parents had done, young enough to be devastated by it. More casualties in this war nobody wanted." "They're asking about you," Michael added cautiously, "wondering if they can visit." The thought of facing them terrified me. What would I say? How could I explain sending their parents to jail without sounding like the villain in their story? "I don't know if I'm ready," I admitted. Michael nodded, understanding without judgment. "No rush. They're not going anywhere. Unlike their parents," went the unspoken thought. The preliminary hearings dragged on through November and into December. James Morrison kept me updated on the legal proceedings, each report more disturbing than the last. "Harry's making a deal," he told me one grey afternoon in mid-December, pleading to lesser charges in exchange for testimony against Deborah. "And she's allowing this?" I asked, remembering her letter, her acknowledgement that Harry was planning to blame everything on her. James shook his head. Her attorney advised against it, but Deborah refused to play that game. "She's pleading guilty to all charges." "Why?" The question escaped before I could stop it. "You'd have to ask her," James said gently. "But if I had to guess, I'd say she's tired of living with lies." The following week I received another letter, this one from the prosecutor's office, explaining that as the victim, I had the right to make a victim impact statement at Deborah's sentencing hearing in January. What could I possibly say? That my daughter's betrayal hurt worse than any physical pain I'd ever experienced. That I alternated between rage at her actions and grief for our lost relationship. That sometimes, in the darkest hours of night, I wondered if I had somehow failed her as a father. Christmas came and went. Michael invited me to Seattle, but I declined. The thought of forced holiday cheer amid family photos and twinkling lights was more than I could bear. Instead, I spent December 25th volunteering at the community center downtown, serving meals to homeless veterans. Men like me, alone, displaced, and trying to find meaning in the wreckage of their lives. "First Christmas without the family?" asked an older volunteer named Ray as we washed dishes together. "That obvious, huh?" He shrugged. "Recognize the look. Had it myself 8 years ago when my wife died and my kids moved away. Gets easier. Does it?" I wasn't sure I believed him. Not easier, maybe. Different. You build a new normal. A new normal. The phrase stayed with me as December faded into January, as the sentencing hearing approached. I wasn't sure I wanted a new normal. I wanted my old life back, my house, my savings, my illusions about my family, but that life was gone, as irretrievable as Margaret's laugh or the feeling of holding my children when they were small enough to fit in my arms. 2 days before the hearing, I finally agreed to meet with Deborah's children. We arranged to meet at a small cafe downtown, neutral territory for all of us. They arrived together, these almost adults who shared my blood but felt like strangers. Jason, tall and lanky like his father, with hair too long and eyes too guarded. Emma, so like Deborah at that age it made my chest ache, all sharp angles and brittle composure. "Grandpa," Emma said, the word stilted, as if she wasn't sure she still had the right to use it. Emma. Jason. I nodded, uncertain how to bridge the chasm between us. "Thank you for coming." We ordered coffee for me, hot chocolate for them, and sat in awkward silence until Jason finally spoke. "Are you really sending Mum to prison?" he asked, his voice cracking on the last word. "Jason," Emma hissed, shooting him a warning look. "It's okay," I said. "It's a fair question." I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. "I'm not sending your mother anywhere, Jason. She made choices, difficult choices with serious consequences." "But you pressed charges," he insisted. "You could drop them." "It doesn't work that way," I explained. "Once there's evidence of a crime, the state takes over. It's not up to me anymore." "So you would drop the charges if you could?" Emma asked, suddenly alert, studying my face for signs of weakness or forgiveness. "Would I? If I had the power to erase the legal consequences of Deborah and Harry's actions, would I use it?" The question haunted me. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "What they did wasn't just wrong, it was criminal. They stole my life savings. They drugged me. They tried to have me declared incompetent." "They were desperate," Jason said, repeating. What I assumed was the family narrative. Dad's business was failing. They needed money. "There are other ways to handle financial problems," I said, keeping my voice gentle despite the surge of anger. "They could have asked for help. They could have declared bankruptcy. They could have downsized their lifestyle. Instead, they chose to steal from the person who would have given them anything if they'd just asked." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "So you hate her now?" "No." The answer came without hesitation. "I don't hate your mother. I love her. I've loved her since the moment she was born. That's what makes this so painful." "Then why are you doing this?" Jason demanded. "Because love without accountability isn't love at all," I said. "It's enabling, and I've done enough of that already." The conversation circled like this for nearly an hour, their anger and confusion meeting my grief and resolve, neither side able to fully reach the other. But as we prepared to leave, Emma suddenly threw her arms around me. "I miss how things used to be," she whispered against my shoulder. "Me too, sweetheart," I said, holding her tightly. "Me too." The day of the sentencing hearing arrived with a snowstorm that blanketed the city in 6 inches of silence. The courthouse steps were treacherous with ice, requiring careful navigation for someone my age with arthritic knees. Inside, the courtroom was packed, reporters eager for the conclusion to a story that had captured local attention, law students observing a high-profile elder abuse case, curious onlookers drawn by the spectacle of family betrayal. Harry was sentenced first in a separate proceeding, 8 years, eligible for parole in 4. Financial restitution ordered but unlikely to ever be paid in full. His family sat stone-faced in the gallery, their expressions unreadable. Then it was Deborah's turn. She entered flanked by bailiffs, her hair pulled back severely, her face pale without makeup. Prison had already begun to erase the polished veneer she'd maintained for so long. The judge reviewed the charges, the evidence, the plea agreement. 10 years, no possibility of parole until at least 6 were served, full restitution ordered, permanent loss of any power of attorney or fiduciary responsibility. "Mrs. Coleman, do you have anything to say before I pronounce sentence?" the judge asked. Deborah stood slowly, her eyes downcast. "No, Your Honor, I accept the consequences of my actions." "Very well. Mr. Caldwell, as the victim in this case, you have the right to make a statement if you wish." All eyes turned to me. I felt the weight of expectation. From the prosecutor who wanted righteous anger, from Deborah's children who wanted forgiveness, from the spectators who wanted drama. I had written and rewritten my statement dozens of times, never satisfied with the words. Now, standing before the court, I set aside the prepared remarks and spoke from the heart. "My name is Richard Caldwell. I'm 73 years old. For most of my life, I believed that family was the one constant you could count on, that blood meant loyalty, that love meant safety. 3 years ago, my wife Margaret died after 49 years of marriage. I was alone for the first time since I was 22 years old. My daughter Deborah seemed to step into that void, offering comfort and support. I was grateful. I was also blind. The details of what happened next are in the court records. The financial exploitation, the isolation, the drugging, the attempted declarations of incompetence. But what those records can't show is the psychological toll of realizing the person you would have died for was slowly killing you. People keep asking if I hate my daughter. I don't. I pity her. Somewhere along the way, she lost sight of what matters. She chose money over morality, security over decency, easy solutions over hard conversations. I'm not here seeking vengeance. I'm here seeking justice, not just for myself, but for every elderly parent who trusts their children to honor the years of sacrifice and love that raised them. Deborah, I look at you and still see glimpses of the little girl who used to climb into my lap after skinning her knee. The teenager who danced with me in the living room before her first prom. The woman who made me so proud when she graduated college. The first in our family to do so. I don't know where that person went. I hope someday she finds her way back. Until then, I have to protect myself from the stranger who took her place. I turned to the judge. Your Honor, I support whatever sentence the court deems appropriate. Not out of malice, but out of the belief that consequences are how we learn our hardest lessons. The courtroom was silent as I returned to my seat. Even the reporters had stopped scribbling. In that moment of quiet, I heard a sound that broke something inside me, the muffled sob of my daughter, finally allowing herself to feel the weight of what she had done. The sentence was pronounced. The gavel fell. Court was adjourned. And just like that, it was over. The legal battle that had consumed my life for months concluded in less than an hour. Outside, the snow continued to fall, erasing footprints as quickly as they were made. I stood on the courthouse steps, unsure where to go next. The media swarmed, shouting questions I had no interest in answering. Through the crowd, I spotted Emma and Jason standing by a car, their faces streaked with tears. I raised my hand in a half-wave, a gesture of acknowledgement rather than celebration. After a moment's hesitation, Emma raised her hand in return, not forgiveness exactly, but not complete rejection either. It was a start. 6 months later, I sat in the visiting room of the Women's Correctional Facility, waiting for Deborah. We had exchanged letters since the sentencing, cautious at first, then gradually more honest. This would be our first face-to-face meeting since that day in court. She entered wearing a beige prison uniform, her hair now streaked with grey that hadn't been there before. Prison had aged her, stripped away the artificial polish, revealed the vulnerability beneath. "Dad," she said, taking the seat across from me. "Deborah?" I nodded, suddenly unsure what to say now that we were actually here. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I wasn't sure you would." "Neither was I admitted. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of our shared history pressing down between us. "How are you?" she finally asked. "I'm okay. Got a part-time job at the library. Patricia put in a good word for me." "The librarian who helped you?" A hint of a smile touched her lips. She sounds like a good person. She is. Another silence. Less strained this time. I've been seeing a therapist here, Deborah offered, trying to understand why I did what I did. And, she looked down at her hands, it's complicated. Greed, yes, but also fear. Fear of failing, fear of not measuring up, fear of losing everything we'd built. She glanced up. Not that it excuses anything. No, I agreed. It doesn't. The kids told me they saw you last month. I nodded. We had lunch. It was stiff, but better than before. Jason starting college in the fall. Mum would have been proud, Deborah said softly. The mention of Margaret hung between us, a shared ghost. She would have been disappointed in both of us, I said finally. Me for not seeing what was happening sooner. You for betraying everything she taught you about integrity. Deborah flinched but didn't disagree. I think about her a lot in here, wonder what she would say to me now. She'd say what she always said when you messed up as a kid, that mistakes don't define you, how you handle them does. Tears filled Deborah's eyes. I can't fix this one, Dad. I can't make it right. No, I agreed. Some things can't be undone, but that doesn't mean we stop trying to be better. We talked for the full hour aloud, about her prison job teaching GED classes, about Michael's kids growing up too fast, about the small apartment I'd finally found that accepted the stray cat I'd adopted. Not the conversation of people who had resolved their differences, but of people who were at least willing to acknowledge they existed in each other's orbits. As visiting hours ended, Deborah hesitated before standing. Will you come again? I don't know, I answered honestly. This is hard. She nodded, accepting the uncertainty. I understand, but I hope you will. Walking out of the prison that day, I felt lighter somehow. Not healed, the wound was too deep for that, but no longer bleeding quite so freely. My new apartment was across town, in a modest complex with a community garden where I'd started growing tomatoes and peppers. It wasn't the home I'd shared with Margaret for 4 decades, but it was mine, paid for with the partial restitution I'd received and the part-time job that kept me busy 3 days a week. On my kitchen wall hung a new family photo, Michael and his family at Thanksgiving, my granddaughter Emma at her high school graduation, Jason in his college orientation t-shirt. And in the center, a small picture of Deborah from before everything fell apart, smiling at a family barbecue. Not forgiveness, not yet, but acknowledgement, recognition that even broken families are still, in some essential way, family. That night, I dreamed of Margaret again. We were sitting on our old front porch, watching the sunset as we had so many evenings during our marriage. You're doing okay, Richard, dreamed Margaret said, her hand finding mine. Am I? I asked. Most days I feel like I'm just stumbling through. She smiled, that gentle smile that had sustained me through every hardship we'd faced together. Stumbling. Through is still moving forward. That's all any of us can do. I woke with tears on my pillow, but peace in my heart. At 74, I was building a life I never expected to have. Not the one I'd planned, not the one I'd wanted, but one that was authentically mine. The betrayal that had nearly destroyed me had also, paradoxically, set me free. Free from illusions about family loyalty, free from the burden of maintaining appearances, free to discover who Richard Caldwell was, when stripped of everything but his essential self. 3 years after that fateful night in the hospital, I still carry the scars of what happened. I probably always will, but I've learned that scars are not just markers of injury, they're evidence of healing. As I water my tomato plants and exchange pleasantries with my neighbors, as I shelve books at the library and have lunch with Patricia, who has become something more than a friend these past months, as I navigate the complicated relationships with my grandchildren and the tentative connection with my imprisoned daughter, I am building that new normal Ray talked about. It's not The life I expected, but it's mine. And at this stage of the journey, perhaps that's enough. If you're listening to my story and wondering about your own family, your own parents, your own temptations, remember this. The measure of our character isn't found in grand gestures or public declarations. It's in the small choices we make when no one is looking, the integrity we maintain when temptation whispers that no one would know, the humanity we preserve even when dealing with those who have hurt us most deeply, because in the end, we all face the same choice, to be defined by what others have done to us or by how we choose to live despite it. I choose the latter. Every day, I choose the latter.